Welcome to the Seminarian Convos podcast.
In this podcast, we share what we've learned on our theological journey as both Independent Baptists and Southern Baptists.
This is the first of a two-part series. We're going to be talking about the positives of our time both at Bible college and then at seminary.
And we'll start with Bible college because that came first. We attended Bible college going on 10 years ago now. Started longer ago than that, but we won't talk about. That makes me feel old. But we went to West Coast Baptist College, which is an independent Baptist college in Lancaster, California, kind of a dirt patch in Southern California, about an hour north of LA.
Yeah, if you ever watch movies and you see desert scenes, chances are they're filmed in the Antelope Valley.
Yeah, lots of things. I mean, it's fairly close to Hollywood and everything like that. So there are a lot of movies filmed there. One of our favorites would be actually in the town that we were in, where Eric was pastor in Rosemond, is the Captain Marvel movie. And there's some shots there. So that's a fun fact right there for you.
Yeah, I remember once they were like, hey, we need background people. Word spread around town that if you want to be in the background of this movie, just walking down the main street there, just be there at this time and just walk. They're going to film and they need background people. I don't think that was Captain Marvel. I think that was a different one. I really wanted to go, but we couldn't.
Yeah, well, we might have missed our chance to be in the Marvel movies too.
Yeah.
But hey, Marvel is part of our history because they also filmed one at the very exact spot where we got engaged. So, there's that too. But I digress. So there's several things which stand out in our minds from our time in Bible college. I would say, too, a lot of what we learned there was learned outside of the classroom with all the different experiences that we had. And one of those, for sure, the biggest one I think that stood out in both of our minds as we talked about all these things was evangelism.
Absolutely. We have talked a lot about the in-class education, accreditation type of stuff, but the stuff that really sticks with you from Bible college is exactly what you said, Rebecca. The things that you learn that are outside of the classroom, the mold that you get impressed into, really, and a lot of which is good. They have a big passion for evangelism, and they carry out their evangelism in many different ways.
For sure. I feel like we could probably title this episode Story Time with Eric and Rebecca, because we're going to share a lot of fun stories. The main way that we carried out evangelism in Bible college was door-to-door evangelism. And that was something that was done every week, for sure. And then there was times where there would be whole days that classes were canceled leading up to big days where we would go out in groups and you would have a longer period of time. Because a lot of times you were limited by who was in your car. People had to go to work. People had projects. And so you might go out for maybe an hour or something on a regular Saturday. But these special times of door-to-door evangelism, you'd go out for a good, 2-3 hours, depending where you were going.
Yeah, it was required to go door-to-door evangelism, and the door-to-door evangelism is not something that works for every area.
That's true.
Here in Texas, I'm sure there's some churches do it and probably do it effectively, but by and large, one thing I've noticed is that Texans are very protective of their property.
Well, especially rural Texans, yes.
Yeah, they're like, what are you doing here type of mentality. So door-to-door evangelism does not work for every culture and area, but in California, it was actually extremely effective because when we bought our house, too, we had people knock on our door all the time, salesmen, and believe it or not, it's crazy for me to think about because I'm not interested in talking to salesmen at the door. But so many people actually answer the door, oh, hi, and they'll talk for 5 or 10 minutes. It's just common. There's very common door-knocking people, and people answer the door and actually talk. So it's actually a really good strategy for that area.
Yeah. I mean, I think post-COVID, it's probably very, very different now with door-to-door type of things all over the country. But that was a great way to, honestly, for me, to conquer a lot of fear in sharing my faith because I'm a non-confrontational type of person. And a lot of people think I'm an extrovert, but I'm really an introvert at heart. And so just having these, cold call, essentially door-to-door encounters with people was definitely out of my comfort zone. But the more you do it, the easier it became. Then there was all sorts of other creative ways of evangelism that we learned too. I know my freshman year in college, I joined what was known as Parks Team. And in addition to going door knocking in a neighborhood around a park, we would invite families and say, hey, we're going to have this program for kids at such and such a time on Saturday. And we'd go out and invite them. And then we would just go to the park. And whoever was there, we would invite them over and be like, hey, is it okay if you and your kids come over and join us? We're going to do some fun games. We're going to have some prizes, sing some songs. And we would just do a child-centered gospel presentation right there in public parks.
Parks team is a good example. The other one is big days. There was constantly big days, at least once a month usually, something along those lines where there would be special church invitations made up, and we would go out and specifically invite people to that specific event, which the gospel would be shared to. Obviously, that's the purpose of the big day in church. And there was other just community impact things like Love Works. We just did all kinds of just good community activities and serving the community. And some of those strategies are the door-to-door evangelism is, hey, we want to try to share the gospel immediately. That's that strategy. But there's also the long-term strategy of the Love Works. We want to build relationships. We want to have a long-term impact. And I know some people think one of the long-term strategy may be better than the immediate strategy, but they're both important and they're both useful.
Yeah, I think a combination of all those different sorts of things is great. And then we also, both of us, were able to take part in special evangelistic opportunities. For me, I did 3 summers of Jewish evangelism in Miami, Florida. And I was able to lead teams of girls. The first summer, I think it was 36. The next summer was 28. And then the last summer was 18 or something, and that wasn't because there was lack of interest. They started opening more and more sites for people to go to. But that first summer we had 5 different sites?
Yeah, I was in Philadelphia. I had 16 guys in Philadelphia, and the second summer I went to Brooklyn. We covered all 5 boroughs of New York City, the Jewish areas, and I think I had 32.
Going back to that overcoming intimidation as you are evangelizing people, that was definitely something that helped get me over the rest of my fear, because you're going into a culture which is built around their religion and trying to tell them, hey, there's something different. You're missing something in your religion. And so, not that everyone was hostile, because I definitely met plenty of people that were friendly and welcoming, but generally speaking, you're going with something that's very confrontational, especially in that culture.
And sometimes it did get hostile. I remember many times in Borough Park, which is ultra-Orthodox, also known as Hasidic area. They would have burning parties. They would gather all of our stuff, and there would be a big fire right in the middle of the road. New York Police Department would come and have to block it off and try to call the fire department to put it out because they were burning our material. So it was very intimidating. Sometimes they did not want to, but sometimes we were able to talk to people that would look around, hey, what is that? And we would tell them what it is, and we would tell them that we're here to tell you about your Savior, Jesus Christ. And they would look around and see if anybody else was looking up. It's like, okay, let me have that. And they were actually interested, but they could not publicly show they were interested. So it was a different style of evangelism, and some of the effectiveness we may never know until we get to heaven.
Yeah, that was something that was a constant source of encouragement that we would encourage each other with is, we may not see the seeds of the gospel bear fruit right now, but who knows who we will see in heaven because of all of this. We had a lot of very good gospel conversations there, and one thing that was really neat was going back for 3 years in a row, we were able to follow up on prospects from the previous years.
Yes, and for us that were used to door-to-door evangelism, we were kind of shoo-ins for that ministry opportunity. It was more intimidating, yes, but at the same time, we were used to going door-to-door. So I didn't realize how different it was for evangelizing Jewish people. Typically, those strategies are always long-term strategies. And I remember I was in Philadelphia the first year, and I get a call from Mark Rasmussen, kind of the guy that's in charge of it all, and he says, hey, we have somebody that you need to go visit. And I'm like, okay, great. great. You need to be at this house at this time and bring somebody else with you. And I'm like, okay, I will. And I didn't know who I was to visit. I'm like, okay, is this a Jewish person that is interested and he wants somebody to tell them more about Jesus? So I remember Joel Pinson went with me, and we went to this guy's. We knocked on the door, and we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what was going on. And he was like, oh, hi. And he was super friendly and invited us in right away. And he started, so how's it going out there? And we quickly gathered that this was not a Jewish person that wanted Jesus shared with him. It was clearly obvious at this time where this was a Jewish person that has already accepted Christ, and he was highly interested in what we were doing. So he asked us a bunch of questions, and I remember how shocked he was. He was like, I can't believe you guys are doing that. Nothing like this has ever been done before that I'm aware of on this scale, going door to door and sharing the gospel. How is it going? What are you guys encountering? And he just wanted to know all kinds of information. He wanted to know everything. So we talked to him for a good couple hours, really. I think it was about 2 hours. And he left. When we left, he gave us these magazines. I think one of them was Friends of Israel magazine, and so these other Jewish evangelism magazines, like, here, this will help you guys, there's some good material in here. And we're like, hey, thanks. What was your name again? And he said his name was Steve Herzig. I'm probably pronouncing his last name wrong, but we didn't think anything of it. We went back to the car, and we got in Joel's truck. I put the magazines down, and I'll never forget, on the back of the magazine cover that we went down, it was this big Jewish evangelism conference, and it was something along the lines of the Friends of Israel Jewish Evangelism Conference. It's a huge nationwide conference, and it said keynote speaker Steve Herzig, and it had his name, his face there. And we're like, dude, that's the guy. That's his house. We were just there. And then we realized that was actually the director of the North American ministries for the Friends of Israel, and he has devoted his life to Jewish evangelism, and he was so interested in that evangelistic opportunity. That was one point when I realized, wow, what we're doing here is really very special, and it was a lot of fun.
It was kind of a one-of-a-kind experience, and I know that they've continued to do it as many years as they could with college students there. It's a neat thing, and I always thought it was pretty cool that we got to be the pioneers of the first group that ever went out from the college.
So if you went to a Bible college that was strong in evangelism, whether it's West Coast or somewhere else, don't lose that.
Yeah. No matter what way you go about it, keep that evangelistic spirit for sure.
Keep sharing the gospel.
So highlight number 2 for us in Bible college was the ministry experiences that you were able to have, which I feel like that was sort of a little bit one and the same there, because the ministry experiences with those summer evangelism groups, we also got to be involved in the local churches, and there was a lot of opportunities to serve in children's ministry, to serve in their music ministry, and lots of different things, just in being a blessing to those churches who were hosting us and helping us and encouraging us along those summers. But you got to do some really cool stuff, something I always kind of wanted to do, but I moved into some roles at the college where I wasn't able to travel on the weekends. But you got to help with 2 different church plants while you were in Bible college.
Yeah, one was in Fresno. It was the Victory Baptist Church. The pastor at the time, the founding pastor, was Ricky Owens. And the other one I got to help is in Simi Valley, California, and that was Pastor Mark Ermler. I learned a lot from both of those guys, just being able to help start both of those churches. We just drove up there every Sunday and drove back every Sunday evening after that. We started from setup, tear down, serving in the services. Often we would go door knocking in the afternoon. It was a full day of ministry, and that kind of on-the-job training was very formative, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like even for those that were not able to avail themselves of all of those opportunities, one thing in the independent Baptist movement, at least from our experience, is that even once you graduate, just with an undergrad, there's a lot of churches that are willing to hire you and do on-the-job training. Even some small churches, we knew of some people that straight out of undergrad went to go pastor, went straight into being a missionary, and I think that was just kind of a nice thing that, they were able to go out there and serve like that.
It is. Now, a lot of those opportunities, though, those churches that would want a fresh Bible college graduate, Often, though, the churches would not necessarily be in good health, and that's a good ministry opportunity in looking at the positives, and it also helps you to be able to form what we call grit.
Mm,
Grit is passion and perseverance. So there's a lot of opportunities. Like my first pastorate when I went to California and pastored that took over that church plant. I took that over on a bivocational status. I
yeah.
worked for the church 3 days out of the week, and I did landscaping the other two. So often you do have to start bivocational, but it helps you to learn grit and it gives you really good ministry experience. And I think that's a strength also, as we were really taught and it was modeled to us that it's not all about a nice and cushy ministry position. It
Hmm.
was about getting your hands dirty, rolling up your sleeves, and evangelizing.
Yeah. Yeah. And persevere through the difficulties, whatever those may be, whether it's finances, whether it's lack of numbers or volunteers or whatever, to just work hard and keep going and keep your sleeves rolled up and work. And I think that's a great thing, because grit is very important in ministry for a lot of reasons.
And God will use it. So if you're listening and you are bivocational or you're in a tough time, I'll tell you what, keep going, brother.
Yes. And if we could ever be a blessing, reach out to us, because we'd love to know and pray for you and encourage you any way that we can. Even send a book or something like that, just to be a help and an encouragement to you. And shout out to all of you bivocational pastors, youth pastors, missionaries, things like that. We are cheering you on, and we appreciate what you do.
Absolutely. So we have the benefits of ministry experience, the benefits of helping us to form a good evangelistic strategy, and helping us to get some grit while we're at it too. And then also, we also learned to place a very high value on the Bible.
For sure. Definitely. And I think throughout, along this kind of ties in with a lot of what I've been exploring and thinking about recently, as I am in the class Baptist Heritage, and talking about, throughout church history, persecution and then heresies that have come up have really helped the church to clarify doctrinal positions over the years, as far as the value on scriptures and the value on key doctrines. And I know, just last week, actually, for my discussion question in Baptist Heritage, we had a breakdown. Did we feel like creeds and catechisms were important? And a creed is a statement of faith, and a catechism is a question and answer, back and forth, doctrinal questions, and then you give the answer. And it's something to be memorized a lot of times for children or new Christians, as they are learning the fundamental doctrines of the Bible. But one key one, well, there's two key ones. There's the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. That's a pretty big one that we have read for classes and things, and is a very important doctrinal statement. And then also the Baptist Faith and Message. So why don't you give a little background on the Chicago Statement?
Yeah, so the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy was really part of the conservative resurgence in a lot of ways. And what it was is, we've talked before on prior episodes about the fundamentalist modernist controversy,
Mm-hmm.
and how the liberalism of higher criticism, and higher criticism is attacking the Bible's authority and the genuineness of the scriptures. Higher criticism would say things like Moses didn't write the first 5 books, like the Bible was written by people who we don't know, and none of it's really true that much. It's kind of the underlying thing of higher criticism there, of the kind that crept into American Christianity, mainly from Germany and other areas too, in the middle of the early to mid 20th century. So what happened is, since there was such an attack on the scriptures in the fundamentalist modernist controversy, there was such an attack on the scriptures, in order to right the ship, they came out with, there was more than 200 different evangelical leaders got together in this conference for the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy. It was held in Chicago in 1978, and they drew up this really big statement on what do we believe about the Bible. And all these people came up with it and signed it, and to this day, on many really good seminaries, you will see on there that they uphold the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. And what that means is they have a high view of Scripture, and that is a very, very good thing.
And the whole function of creeds is to unify believers around essential doctrine. And I think that was something very attractive to us about the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 when we first read that, 2.5 years ago, I think, maybe something like that now, that we had first read that and become familiar with that. And it was just refreshing to know. I would say with the high value on the Bible, the only downside to that in our background was that the high value a lot of times was placed on the King James Version solely, and other versions were kind of talked against. But the positive side to that is just we learned you really should hold fast the doctrine, and that's an important thing. The key doctrines, don't ever waver on those, because that's very important, and have a good foundation for that. And that kind of leads into theological triage. This is a conversation we've had and talked about a lot.
Yeah, it's laid out in the first chapter of Albert Mohler's book, The Disappearance of God, as well as I think he's written some articles on there. You could probably just look it up, but he calls it theological triage. And what it is there's three levels. He goes into the origin of the word triage. It comes from this word that means to sort. And the picture is when you get into the emergency room, if you're there because you need stitches, but let's say it's a small cut on your hand, you've already stopped the bleeding. It's important that you get it stitched up, but it's not urgent. You're not going to die from it. And somebody else comes from a car accident that is near the point of death. Well, even though you got there first, which one are they going to treat first? They're going to sort and figure out, okay, which one of these is more important, which one is more urgent, which one do we need to see first? That's triage. And Albert Mohler argues for a theological triage. And by that, he has three different levels of it. The first level of theological triage is the critical issues. These are issues like the Trinity, the deity of Christ, justification by faith. These are the essentials of the faith. Listen, if you don't believe these, you are not a Christian. If you don't believe in the substitutionary atonement of Jesus Christ and the salvation by faith, you are not a Christian. These are the non-negotiables right here. So
this would be the separation from somebody like the Mormons.
Absolutely. Mormons and others like that. How do you identify a true believer? How can we work together with unbelievers, with believers? It's through theological triage. So the first level, there's the critical issues. The second level are issues that true born-again believers may disagree on. All right. Now, it's important to understand in this, somebody's right, somebody's wrong. But they're still believers. You can be right on the gospel and wrong on baptism, for example.
Exactly.
You can believe in a baptism in a different form. Now, obviously, we're Baptists. We believe it's a dunk or a plunge, a baptizo, immersion. Everyone's listening to this probably already knows that, all right? But I'm not going to say that a Presbyterian who believes different or something about baptism has the gospel wrong.
Right. We're going to have plenty of people that were sprinkled in heaven.
Absolutely. They're still saved. All right. And this is the same thing with controversial issues like women pastors. Personally, I do not believe the scripture allows a woman pastor. But
Correct.
I'm not going to call a woman pastor or somebody who believes in a woman pastor, I can't call them unsaved, because you can be right about the gospel and wrong on that issue. And it's important for us to triage that, because if we're not careful, we will look at people that hold to different beliefs on these issues, and we can consider them in our mind, or we can treat them as unbelievers, and that is not right.
Yeah. But you would probably not have these people join membership of your church.
Exactly.
You would probably not have a lot of these people be a guest speaker for your church, that sort of a thing. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn some things from these people, and that outside of the church, at a conference on Christian music or something like that, that you're not going to fellowship with those people, that you would not completely ostracize them from your life or something like that, and view them as somebody that needs to be evangelized.
Yes, in terms of ministry practice, there's some gaps there, and there
Right.
always will be gaps there. But at the end of the day, they're still your brother in Christ. Like it or
Exactly.
not, they are. Same thing, like Bible versions would be in this issue too.
Mm-hmm.
We can't look at people that use a different Bible version and say they're not believers. No, you can be right on the gospel and wrong about Bible versions or have a different position there.
Yes. If you want to know more about second level issues, just get a Twitter account. You'll learn all sorts of things.
Oh yeah, and this is where the most heated discussions is in the second level, because people confuse these second level issues with the first level issues.
Well, because
And
those things that are laid out in the Bible. The Bible does say that baptism is by immersion. And people that do not believe that it's by immersion struggle with that. I mean, even going to back, we brought up this many times, but to the Golden Shore, Adoniram Judson firmly believed sprinkling is fine, infant baptism is fine. And then when he went to go and prove his point from the scriptures, he's like, actually, it's not. So he became a Baptist.
yeah, but you can still be right on the gospel.
Right, right. Exactly.
So I don't want to beat a dead horse there too much.
So first, second, third level, what is that?
So those are things that you can disagree on and remain in close fellowship. So this is something like communion. Do you have open communion? That is, anybody that's present in your service can take communion. Some churches do closed communion. That's for members only. And some churches do what's called close. What that is if you're a believer and you're of like faith, you can partake even though you may not be a member of the church. Mm-hmm. So something like that you can disagree on and still remain in close fellowship. We've talked about this before. Eschatology, your belief on different eschatology, and you can still be a member of a church. You can still be best friends. You could be ministry partners. You can be all kinds. You can band together in every way, and you can identify that there are some things that you disagree on. Mm-hmm. Another controversial, well, it's considered controversial by some. I personally don't think it is. Preferred worship style would be in this level. You can disagree. You can prefer a more old-fashioned type. You can prefer a contemporary worship style. That's okay. But don't ostracize those who disagree with you on that, because that's not found in the Bible. These are issues that are not clearly laid out in the scriptures, not 100% at least. And how you interpret it, if it can seemingly fit with a different interpretation, or if it's not clearly laid out, you can disagree and remain in close fellowship. And we mentioned Bible versions in the second level, but really I would actually put Bible versions in the third level, because the New American Standard is not mentioned once in the Bible. The English Standard Version is not mentioned once, and the King James Version is not mentioned once. So as much as we talk about it being a Bible issue, it's not mentioned in the Bible. English language is not even once alluded to in the scriptures. So we can't elevate that into a position where it's such a critical issue. That really belongs in level 3. And that's kind of one of the goals of our podcast, is to help people to work together with other Christians and to help people to sort these beliefs. Because I want to challenge you, if you are listening to this and you think that something like a worship style or a Bible version or modesty on women or something, although there are biblical principles that could be found in every one of those, that's not a critical issue. They're not level 1 critical issues. We have to see that those are level 3 critical issues. The level 3, and what that means is you can disagree and remain in close fellowship.
In the same church, serving together in a ministry, etc., etc., etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the danger in all of that, and I feel like we've sort of digressed a little bit from the value of the Bible, but in the value of the Bible, if you go too far to the extreme, then everything becomes a first level critical issue, because, well, it's found in the Bible or it's a biblical principle, but unless it's clearly laid out, it's black and white, like salvation in the Bible, then you can't make that a first level issue, because it just gets into preferences, and preferences divide people.
Yeah, I think there's another thing that I would put in the third level, something that you can disagree and be okay and remain in close fellowship, is Calvinism. You can disagree on that and brother, we can still work together.
Exactly. And I heard it said once that the best Calvinists, you would never know they're Calvinist because they're still evangelistic. They're still, that's not their key issue and their soapbox that they like to jump on.
And I think a big takeaway from this theological triage is going back to these creeds. One thing that we really appreciate about the Baptist faith and message is it unifies believers.
Yes.
And that's the great thing about the cooperative program in the Southern Baptist Convention is as long as you believe in the Baptist Faith and Message of 2000 or something really, really close to it, you are accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the spirit that believers ought to have, that we would have some sort of theological triage or identify the core doctrines and say, if you believe these, we love you, we accept you, and it creates a culture of love and acceptance, which is exactly what the family of God should be.
Yes. And circling back to what we learned in Bible college, I think the biggest thing is just when you know, without a shadow of doubt, this is a Bible doctrine, hold fast. Be willing to die for that. Be willing to be ridiculed from that. Be willing to have other people say, you're too fanatic because you hold to that. But hold on to it because it's worth it. As usual, we will end our episode by giving you a list of resources that we will have linked at the end. So, Eric, which resources are we going to give them today?
Really only one new resource we'll link to. One of them we've linked before, Baptist Faith and Message 2000. Mm-hmm. It's a great doctrinal statement, and all of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 is just a great doctrinal statement to help you with your theological triage there. So check that out. And then also we're going to include a link to the 1978 Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. If you've never checked that out, do it. I think that is one thing that has highly impacted American evangelicalism in a very positive way and helped all branches of American Christianity to uphold a high value of the Scripture, and that's important.
Definitely. And also, please be sure to follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram is just Seminarian Convos. You can also reach us by email, seminarianconvos@gmail.com. And we love to see your faces as well. So look us up on Facebook, just our personal Facebook, Eric and Rebecca Denke.
Yeah, we're one of those that have a joint account.
We do. Confuses people occasionally on who wrote the comments or made the post, but it's fun.
It's fun.
And thank you for joining us for today's convo.